Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us. My name is Olga Tomanova, and Ukraine Media Center continues its operation today. And now we have invited you for a briefing dedicated to our energy system. So let's discuss the way we are through this heating season, preparation to the new heating season, and the challenges faced by our power grid. Joining us in the studio is Yuriy Boyko, advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine, member of the Supervisory Board of Ukrenergo. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So we know we're through the heating season. We've made it pretty good, better than the expectations were, both on part of the Ukrainians and experts who were saying about the possible challenges. So how have we made it through in this stable manner? And just a couple of words about preparation to the new heating season. What are the works underway, and how are we entering this new heating season? How are we prepared to it? Well, really, the heating season during the years 24-25, we're already through it. However, the weather continues being surprising. We had to extend the heating season in many cities of Ukraine, in some specific facilities. However, the cold months are already behind, and traditionally, the best assessment of the work of the energy technicians is the fact that there is light, there is heating in the homes of our Ukrainians and at our manufacturing facilities. We've made it through without significant shutdowns. Well, in December last year, there was the last massive strike on the energy infrastructure. However, the energy technicians have already extensive experience in terms of response to such situation, and we have a good range of spare parts that are actively used during such periods. And thanks to that, they were able to overcome the consequences of that latest attack. And the latest restrictions were only of local nature. And the last period of mitigation of all of the damage was 3 days. I think that is pretty illustrative of the key factor that helps us to make it through this winter with heating and lights. And the key to this is human resources. Our people make miracles, and thanks to them, we are sitting here with heating, with lights, and I really appreciate their input. So, talking about other important factors, obviously important factors that were of impact on this heating season was the uninterrupted operation of our atomic energy sector without any single emergency. They've made it, and I could say I could put a 5+ mark for them. Then our thermal generation technicians, they recovered the equipment that seemed to be impossible to recover and recommissioned in operation. I mean, now in the absence of photo and video materials for the public, I mean, it's prohibited. Probably it's difficult to imagine what those people do, recovering sometimes almost fully destroyed equipment. But still, it is so. Our hydraulic energy sector, it also entailed a lot of work. The technicians recovered a lot of equipment. I mean, there were no rolling shutdown schedules this winter. There were some problems in the areas close to the front lines. Specifically, there were the cheap projectiles could be used. I mean, in proximity of the range of the use of S-300 missiles or the cannon artillery. So those regions were affected, but still we've made it through this winter with minimal losses. And if we recall such a company as Ukrenergo, probably for an umpteenth time we have to reemphasize that serious work that was fulfilled and that is actually continuing on construction of the protection measures of the second level. It proved to be effective, and we have cases when the enemy using a broad range of projectiles still didn't achieve any excess. We have to understand when there is a Shahed drone incoming to a power station, it definitely will inflict certain damage, but if we preserve the key equipment, the speed of recovery works, it will be way, way more different. And the last case that I've mentioned on the 25th of December last year, it proved my statement. Also, we have a broad range of spare parts and equipment which is used in emergency situations, and the recovery works are not interrupted for just a single moment. So this list can be going on and on because I've only mentioned the key factors to explain why have we made it successfully through this winter. But in fact, I really appreciate the circumstances, but the circumstances actually helped us to demonstrate the work. Unfortunately, the work remains unnoticed, but mostly the results of the work of the energy technicians, because just like we were saying in the eve of the winter, given the absence of the massive rocket strikes and drone strikes on our power grid, we will be able to ensure the uninterrupted power and heating supply for our citizens. So despite the predictions, as you've mentioned, by our experts and our foreign colleagues who were doubting the ability to make it through this winter without any damage, still we've made it through. Well, really, the weather has brought some more surprises. It's snowing outside. The central heating in many cities, maybe all of the big cities, is already off, and we understand it results in additional load on our power grid because everybody keeps heating with the electric energy. So to what extent does it impact our power grid? And the question of concern to all of the Ukrainians, should we expect rolling power shutdowns now? Well, based on the forecast that you may find in a lot of internet sources, we are almost through this cold season. During this weekend, the weather is going to become warm, more traditional for this time of the year, significant warmth, and respectively, we will be able to turn that page again. But again, those weather conditions behind our windows, they have already resulted in significant consumption in the power grid. However, the existing equipment, the condition of the existing equipment allows the energy technicians to keep the situation under control. And if you have noticed, there were no even attempts to announce any power shutdowns. So we use only the internal resources covering the evening hours with our imports. Our power technicians, they balance that difference. And definitely during evening hours, we have deficits. We have to understand it, and we have to announce it. That's the objective reality of today. But still, the deficit is covered by imports, and we make it balance in our system. Also, in the context of your question, in my opinion, it's a little bit broader than the context of today and tomorrow. So, but I need to remind that in fact the recovery repair and maintenance campaign has started, which means preparation for the next year. We have maintenance going on our nuclear power plants, which includes refueling. So traditionally during the warm time of the year, there is the reduction of load on the power grid, and we started initiating the repair and maintenance campaign to balance the equipment that is being worn during winter times. So let's recall the last summer. Everybody remembers how difficult it was during the last summer. So let me remind you that the cause of such a difficult situation, specifically in June, was overlapping of a number of factors. The scheduled repair and maintenance campaign, because was the other time to do the repair works. But again, in March, let me remind you, there were a couple of waves of massive strikes of the enemy on our energy infrastructure. Significant damage was inflicted, and all those factors resulted in misbalancing in the power grid. But for the time being, those measures developed by the energy technicians, they allow us to state that the scenario will be more favorable, and the campaign is scheduled in such a way that the deficit periods are minimized, and the peaks don't exceed our capacity. Let me remind you that starting from the 1st of April, we've returned the previous limit. For the European colleagues lifted the bar for the winter and March for 1,200 megawatts, and now it's at the level of 800, but it will be sufficient to cover the deficit in the system and not to resort to the shutdowns. Well, you've mentioned the imports, that now during the peak hours we're importing the electric energy. Is it safe to state that our imports is working on the limit, on its limit, or do we have any reserve? Well, in fact, there are reserves. The import is not used to its 100% capacity. Moreover, during night hours and during the days of a high sun, as the energy technicians are saying, there are some hours when we export the excessive electric energy from our system. But again, it's more inherent in night hours and some days when sun is really shining bright, and the dispatchers, they have the usual dilemma to either export a little bit or to use some restrictive measures, because regeneration is impossible in the system. The key requirement of the proper operation of the power grid is the balance during every single second, which dictates us to impose certain restrictions during the days of a bright sun. Another topic that is of concern to everybody is the procurement of gas. So is the resource sufficient, and where can we take more gas to replenish those reserves which are almost exhausted? Well, in fact, the reserves are not exhausted. If they are, we would feel it at home, like as you try to switch on your gas oven. The gas is actively used by all types of consumers, starting with the electricity manufacturers and as well as the end consumers, the household consumers. But still the gas infrastructure is in balance. But you're absolutely correct to state that for the time being, one of the biggest challenges for the state in terms of preparation to the next heating season will be the necessity to accumulate significant amounts of gas given the fact that the enemy inflicted strikes on our gas infrastructure, gas distribution infrastructure. Many facilities were damaged. I'm not going to remind you once again that the figures are sensitive information. That's why I'm not disclosing any of them. I'm not making any loud statements in terms of necessity of imports or something like that. But let me just put it like that, that there is a work going on to ensure some resources for Naftogaz to accumulate sufficient amount of gas until the next heating season. And in parallel with that, there is a serious work going on recovery of internal gas mining in national facilities, and more than a half of what was damaged is already recovered and is back in operation. And respectively, it allows us to reduce that misbalance of gas that was created during the strikes on the gas infrastructure. We were able to recover it to the significant extent, including the indicators of the internal mining. Well, not all the way up to those indicators that existed before the strike, but still we have understanding of amount of gas that we need to accumulate until the next season. I'll be straightforward. It's a challenge because we have to understand that to fulfill the task, there will be three key factors: the sufficiency of financial resources for procurement, and there's a lot of good developments. I think that Naftogaz may announce it by themselves. Then the availability of those resources in European markets. Very frequently we will be coming across a situation, in my opinion, when we will have to probably look somewhere across the ocean to work with the liquefied gas, with the liquefied gas delivered from the United States to Europe. And just like in the power grid, there are limitations on the maximum capacity of the kilowatt hours from our Western neighbors to Ukraine, and the same applies to gas. There is a restriction that are imposed by the capacity of the interconnectors, and that's the fact that renders impossible such a strategy that was adequate during previous years, like let's buy the gas during the period when it's the cheapest, during the summertime. Given the current situation, the import should continue on a continuous basis, and unfortunately the price factor is not a key factor here, because we have to understand that in order to achieve the planned indicators of accumulation, import cannot be even suspended during those periods when we don't like the price or we have expectations that the price may go down within the month to come. That's the situation for the time being. But talking in absolute figures, what is our requirement for the time being? The consumption across the country is 20 billion cubic meters. Okay, coming back to the topic of recovery, we understand that the situation is the most difficult in Odessa and Kharkiv region, those regions which are close to the front lines. So how intense are the works on protection of those facilities that ended up in the area of direct strikes? You know, your question is extremely precise. In those regions, we have such a situation where, well, traditionally, I'm not going to call the names, but when the enemy has unsuccessfully used a number of drones and missiles on Ukrenergo facilities, which strike did not result in any significant restrictions in power supply, the enemy has changed the tactics and they started inflicting strikes on the networks of the distribution companies. And we have to understand that the key difference when we talk about the networks of Ukrenergo, that they are real numerous and they have larger capacity for reserves than Ukrenergo has. But given such a crazy number of drones aimed specifically at substations of Odessa Oblenergo, it unfortunately resulted in long-lasting power shutdowns for the consumers who reside in that region, and it's really a challenge, a problem that needs to be solved. I know that today the work on development of a physical protection of such facilities is underway, and what's important here is the funding program, because if we recall that campaign by Ukrenergo, everything was done at cost of their own resources. So all of the facilities protected by the company, well, it was done at grand cost, and the donor donated money. And when we talk about something similar in the networks of Oblenergo, they are all private, and the number of facilities is way bigger than the number of Ukrenergo facilities. It entails a whole different amount of work. That's really a problem. And now the work is underway on prioritization of such facilities to pick the key ones and to fulfill the protection works to render such scenarios impossible, to protect those networks that no one was thinking about, because all of the previous attacks were focused on key power stations, key substations operated by Ukrenergo. And currently we have a situation when in the areas close to the front lines, specifically in Odessa, the enemy has changed its tactics and they inflict strikes on the distribution company's facilities. Dear colleagues, and now I would like to give the microphone to you.
I'd like to ask you a specific question. Since the meeting in Saudi Arabia, and this is the final one, when Trump announced that there was an agreement, and in fact there was no agreement because there are different interpretations, but let's say since the 24th of March, the last Jeddah meeting, both sides, Moscow and Kyiv, accused each other of different things, Yuriy and that, but of heating energy facilities, plants. From your side, from the Ukrainian, can you, because we have the impression, I mean, journalists have the impression there is a lot of propaganda. Maybe there is a bomb exploding in a neighborhood and there is some electric line and this damage. Okay, but that's an attack. Can you be specific? Can you tell us, since the 24th of March, how many Ukrainian energy facilities have been attacked specifically? And, not a wire, but something more substantial. And can you try to give a dimension to the damage? Thank you.
Дякую за запитання.
Thank you for this question. In fact, it's a very correct question and at the same time very difficult. Let me put it like this. All of the incidents when the Russians violate so-called energy ceasefire, they are documented by the Ministry of Energy on a daily basis and are handed over through international organizations for further analysis by the American party. But at the same time, it's worth saying that as we talk about the biggest infrastructure facilities, whether belonging to Ukrenergo or gas transportation system, or the biggest power stations, we may safely state that when it comes to those biggest facilities, there were no attacks on them. What is attacked is the infrastructure along the front lines, including energy and gas infrastructure, and it's attacked randomly. Thank you for your answer. Any more questions, dear friends? Well, now that we have no more questions on the floor, I would like to thank you for this conversation, Mr. Yuriy. Let me remind you, joining us in the studio was Yuriy Boyko, the member of the Supervisory Board of Ukrenergo, and I would like to thank our security and defense forces for opportunity to hold events like this, and now we're putting together a plan for tomorrow. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.